Welcome to Pringle's Kitchen and a no-bake cookie recipe. This recipe has been in my wife's family for many years, and my kids grew up with the dessert that we would make. It's more candy than cookies, but if you don't have any flour, um, just have a little bit of milk. All you need is sugar and cocoa, a little bit of milk. I use oatmeal, and you need butter or margarine. So we need to add a little chemistry into here. So this is my non-polar hydroscopic layer, the butter, and the cocoa over there doesn't dissolve well in water and will dissolve well in the butter. And so we have quite a bit of butter because we're going to add 1.5 tablespoons of cocoa. I've cut the recipe that you saw at the beginning in half, so just a little bit of milk and some butter, and we'll add the sugar. Lots of sugar, like I said. This is essentially a candy, and then of course chocolate, because that's what you need when you make a dessert is chocolate. So the chocolate is nonpolar and will dissolve well in the butter, which is also nonpolar. And the sugar is a pretty large molecule and dissolves well in both of them. And so we end up with this mixture that is colloidal, since it doesn't go clear, so it's not quite a solution, but it's uniform all the way throughout. And so we just need to stir that all together. So what we're going to end up with is a sugar solution that's perhaps 70% sugar and a little bit of liquid that's dissolved in it. And as we heat it to dissolve it, we end up making what's called a supersaturated solution. So if we let it cool down again, the sugar would come out of the liquid, and so we need heat to keep it in solution. And so there's actually more sugar in this solution than there should be if it was just at normal temperature. So we're going to heat it up, and the purpose of the heating is not to cook it, but to evaporate the water away from the solution or mixture. So to do that, we have a medium-high heat because we're not trying to cook it and we don't want to burn the sides. But what we do want to do is get it up to boiling so that we can boil off the sugar. Meanwhile, you can see the butter, or the non-hydrophilic or non-polar parts coming out a little bit. But as a whole, it's all mixed together. So at this point, we have about 80% sugars in that whole liquid mixture. Probably a little less because the fats take up some of that space. But if we're making pure sugar, we would end up with about 80% sugar. Now that's called soft thread because when you put that into ice cold water, you end up with a thread of the solution. And so that's too soft. That's just going to be like a very thick frosting. Will be the best that we can do. So we should let it boil some more. And you don't have to stir. We just need it to constantly be agitated and boiling to drive off more of the liquid as we go towards 80 to 85%, about 85% of the sugar. So as I was doing some research online, it turns out that most chefs use this ice water method. We have a candy thermometer at home that we use because this recipe is a little touchy. You have to get the sugars just right. And what you do is you cool your fingers in ice water, and then you reach into the pan and pull out a little bit of it, And what will happen is the liquid will start boiling on your hand, but it creates a cushion of air that insulates your hand from the heat. Probably not recommended if you have a candy thermometer at home. We found that the candy thermometer about 234 is where we stop the heating and start mixing. But if you go online or you go to a nice chef school, you'll learn how to do this. And right now we have something sort of soft and flexible, so we're getting pretty close to what we want, because we want this to hold up and hold our candy together. If you get to 245, you've gone too far. So between 85 and 87 is just a bit too much. So that's about right. We dropped it in, sort of formed a solid mass, and that feels right. So I should have stopped the video about this point because we had everything going. Just thrown it down and start mixing in the oats, because this recipe, once you get it to the right consistency and the proper percentage of sugar, you got to work quickly. So at this point, the solution is still losing water, and so I'm in trouble, and I know that, but I also know that I'm trying to make a video for you. So I can feel it getting a little too hard. It's not maintaining its flexibility, and so I'm moving quickly towards this hard ball, hard candy stage. So what you'll need is non-hydrophilic, this hydrophobic surface. Wax paper is recommended. We use parchment paper, which works just as well. No liquids to get inside of it, and so everything comes off. So these first two, pretty good, and now you can see everything starting to break apart, and that's because the sugars are crystallizing out. Supersaturated solutions that are not well preserved, where there's too much agitation, will crash out, and I'm getting crystals of sugar, and I'll show you a picture at the end where you can actually see the crystals of sugar. Tried a little butter to hold that together, and just wasn't a good idea. So one of your jobs will be to do these experiments to see if you can create something that's delicious and lovely and works. So I thought about it as I went through all this chemistry and discovered what was happening to make this solution. I realized that all of this crystalline stuff that I had was basically still the ingredients of the recipe. What I needed to do was dissolve it. So you can see the top ones looking pretty good, and then as I go along, I just end up with crumbs. The whole thing's falling apart because my sugars have crystallized out. They haven't stayed in solution. So I poured some liquid in there, redissolved all that stuff that I had, and ended up with some pretty good cookies. This one at the top in dark chocolate is where I added some more liquid and got it to resolve. The one on the left, that's where you can actually see crystals of sugar have fallen out, and the one on the right is what we normally see when we see a no-bake cookie. So your job is to make some changes to this recipe, whether it's using chocolate chips instead of cocoa, maybe using coconut oil instead of margarine, switch for a dry cereal instead of oats. Less sugar certainly would be more welcome in this situation too, because it's a candy, and as we know, sugar is not good for you, although they're really good with coffee. So what you have to do for the rest of the assignment is you have to do an experiment in the kitchen at home that you can share with people. So you're going to create your own no-bake cookies, which you'll alter in some way. And then we're going to share this on a Google slide. And that's also in the assignment. And you'll see mine, we'll see yours, we'll get a rating from each of them, and we should really enjoy, I'm hoping that you will enjoy this kind of lesson. So let me know. Thank you.